Greetings, everyone. Greetings, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this day. I know we're in the afternoon and everyone's getting ready for the post-wrap party. I know we have a DJ. We're going to be dancing and whooping it up. So before we do that, the last session of our day is probably going to be one of the most important sessions of the day. And we have an expert. She hails to us from GlaxoSmithKline, and she'll put in context for us a lot of what we learned today. But the underlying fact is that health equity can be achieved through clinical trial participation. And I will let Dr. Harry speak more to you about that. The name of her talk is The Value of Diverse Representation in Global Clinical Research. Now I'm going to say a few words about Dr. Anya Harry. Dr. Anya Harry is the global head for global demographics and diversity at GlaxoSmithKline, who is our sponsor. Her passion for this area evolved from her experiences in the practice of medicine, public health, and drug development and research. Previously, she was a director in clinical research, clinical development, providing leadership and medical support for early as well as late stage programs and device initiatives in the respiratory medicine arena. After several years as a pulmonary critical care physician in private practice, Dr. Harry became a medical officer and subsequently a branch chief at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Prior to joining GlaxoSmithKline, she directed a multidisciplinary team for a global consulting firm with a large focus on rare disease. Dr. Harry received her MD, PhD from Mount Sinai School of Medicine and completed her residency at Yale New Haven Hospital. She completed a combined pulmonary and critical care medicine training at the University of Pennsylvania and the National Institutes of Health. Dr. Harry has authored many peer-reviewed articles and book chapters. And now I introduce you to Dr. Anya Harry.
Hello, Rosalind. Hello, all. Thank you so much for the introduction. I appreciate it. Let me just share my screen to make sure we can go smoothly. Share. Fantastic. And there you go. All right, so I'm absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to talk to you about the value of diverse representation in our global clinical research. This is really about informing you to take charge of your healthcare. I'm going to share with you a lot of information, a lot of data, a lot of graphs for the first half of the presentation. And please, that's not meant to overwhelm you or to run you away, but it's really, again, to inform you and empower you so that you can ask questions, you can demand answers, and you can help to drive the health equity. Okay, again, this is really about you. So what we're doing at GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, we're committed to diverse representation in our clinical studies. We have a team dedicated just to this, and we work across the enterprise to make sure that we deliver on our mission. In addition to that team of purely dedicated individuals, we have a fierce army of passionate individuals that are volunteering to help us drive again to meet our mission. So what we're doing is that we're engaging with communities and advocacy groups to build trust, enhance awareness, and provide education and outreach. As well, we're making sure that we're understanding and advocating for current clinical study diversity guidelines from agencies and professional organizations, as well as from community and patient advocacy groups. As well, we're training and supporting GSK staff because this is critical that this is part of our culture. And as well, making sure that our clinical trial investigators have the best practices in order to be successful in including diverse individuals in our clinical research. At the foundation of all of this, why is this important? Is because that diseases, medicines, and vaccines can affect people differently depending upon their race, ethnicity, age, and gender. So in order to make sure that we're giving the right medicines to the right patients, we need to have this data in the clinical trials. So really quickly over the agenda, let's go over a number of examples of why clinical trial diversity is indispensable. Let's talk about the barriers, so you're aware, the barriers that are blocking individuals from participating in our clinical trials. And then I'll run through the strategic roadmap and how GSK is fully embracing the opportunities of clinical trial diversity. Let me start with a saying from a renowned physician in both the United States as well as the UK that talks about the medicine in the face of variability of individuals. This is Sir William Osler. He said, "If it were not for the great variability amongst individuals, medicine might as well be a science and not an art. It's an art because we're taking care of individuals." And so he understood it and captured this well over 130 years ago. We're just now catching up to him. So we'll go over a number of examples of why clinical trial diversity is indispensable. And I know that this is a virtual summit, but let me take a moment and ask you, think about, are you taking any medications for any chronic diseases? Are you taking medications for high blood pressure, high cholesterol, maybe for asthma or COPD? Most of us are actually taking the vaccines or about ready to take the vaccines or asking questions about the vaccines for COVID-19. The point here is that all of these medicines and vaccines have gone through these same processes and have included individuals. What's important here is that they include individuals such as you so that we understand the variability of responses. So there are a number of examples where there are differences in those responses. One are certain blood pressure medications that aren't as effective in Black, African Americans, or individuals of African descent. Another example are some certain sleeping medication, where the dosing requirement had to actually be changed many years after it was already in the market. So the dose was actually supposed to be less for women than men. And what ended up happening is that there were impaired incidences, accidents, etc., because the original dose was too high. So what's important here is that these examples are examples where we found that information afterwards. We found that information once the medicines were already on the market. And what's important here is to be able to get this information while we're understanding the medicines and the vaccines, so we can adequately include that in the label, so the physicians, nurses know how to prescribe this information. What's important is that there are different responses again, and what are the causes of those different responses? There are a number of factors. Some of them are what we call intrinsic factors, and this is basically based on the makeup of your body. And there are differences in how different individuals will break down the medicines. There are differences based on genetics on the targets at which these medicines will act. And those are examples of intrinsic factors. There are also extrinsic factors. And these are examples that may include habits based on your diet, based on alcohol use or smoking, or even medical practice that changes from region to region, or even cultural attitudes. All of these factors can make a drug respond differently in your body or can cause you to have a different safety profile, a different side effect. And so again, in order for us to understand how the drug, as well as the population and the disease interact, we need to have that information and we need to have individuals such as you in the clinical trials. So now that we know a little bit more about the science as far as why this is important, let's talk about the state of our healthcare. I know you've heard already some of this earlier in the presentations. Let's go over a little bit more of a wider view of this. What you see here are the maternal mortality ratios in 2018 across 11 high-income countries. So off to the left is what you see are the deaths per 100 live births in 11 countries. Way off to the left, you'll see New Zealand. So what we're trying to do is compare apples to apples. So we're looking at every 100 live births and how many mothers unfortunately died during that period of time in New Zealand. It's around 1.7. For every 100 live births in Germany, it was 2 times that amount, closer to 3.2. In the United Kingdom, for every live 100 births, 6.5 mothers died. And in the United States, you can see it was 17.4. So 10 times the number of mothers died during childbirth compared to New Zealand during that period of time of 2018. Again, a current understanding of the state of our health in the globe. So off to the right, what you see are pregnancy-related death rates. So you see here, I have an example of the UK as well as an example of the United States. This is not meant to compare between the countries, but to compare between the races and different in these countries. So what you can see here over the period of time from 2015 to 2017 in the United Kingdom, Black women died 5.4 times greater than white women in the United Kingdom. In the United States, Black women died 3.2 times greater than white women. And this was over a longer period of time from 2007 and 2016. So again, an understanding of the current state of our healthcare system. So that's what's going on with the mothers. What about the babies? As you can see here on the top, this is an example. I'm going to focus just on the US and look at the US infant mortality rate. Mortality rate is often looked at as a marker of the nation's health. And so what you can see here is now we're looking at 1,000 live births. Off to the left, for every 1,000 live births, 11 Black babies die. And that's in stark contrast to only 4.9 or 5 babies dying that are white and 3.6 babies dying that are Asian. So significant disparities in healthcare that break down by race and ethnicity. To the bottom left, you see a number of examples of some communicable diseases. Hepatitis B, you see Asian individuals have higher infection rates versus white individuals. Some of that is based on migration. However, the death rates are much higher in Asians than whites. Off to the bottom right, you see HIV, and you see the differences between African American men and white men, much higher rates of infection, as well as African American women versus white women. Again, much higher infections. Again, these are the disparities, so the differences that are broken down by race and ethnicity. Here in this example, there are a number of disparities for our older population. Our older adults are amongst the groups that are prescribed the most medicines, right? However, they are the most underrepresented in the testing of those medications. And why is that? Some of the eligibility criteria, what it takes to enter into clinical trials, often exclude our older population. So we have to make sure we're working on that. And as well, it could just be an issue of logistics. Many times these clinical studies are performed at academic sites where our older population does not get their care typically. And then it might be too challenging in terms of requirements for time for the caregiver support. So let's talk about the barriers. What's actually impeding individuals from participating in our clinical trials? Off to the right, what you see here is the result of a number of surveys that were conducted through the Wellcome Trust Monitor. And this was one survey in 2009 and another survey conducted in 2012. And they combined them together and they looked at the past participation in clinical research, as well as the willingness to participate in medical research. And what you can see here is that about 12% of the individuals that responded to these surveys said that they did participate in a clinical trial. Of those, 13% of white British individuals said that they participated in clinical research, and 5% of Black, Asian, minority, or ethnic individuals said that they ever participated in a clinical research. How about the willingness to participate? One thing to actually do it, but are you willing to do it? 67% of respondents said that they're fairly or very willing to participate. So that says people want to and are able to participate in the clinical trial. Maybe they're not being asked or they don't have the access to it. So we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. Off to the left, what you see is the gap between the representation in, say, the US population and that representation in the clinical trials. So the orange bars here are that representation of African American or those populations in the United States. And then the black bars represent how are they represented in the clinical trials. So for example, African Americans are 13% in the US, but overall and populate in the clinical trials, they only represent about 5% of the clinical trial participants. Latinos, 16% in the United States, but only 5%. So these are gaps. Typically, what we like to do is actually make sure that the individuals that are participating in the clinical trial, at the very least, represent the individuals with the disease. So, for example, if you have sickle cell anemia, you want to make sure that the majority of the populations are Black individuals or individuals of Mediterranean background, because those are the individuals that are affected by it. And the same with sickle cell, the same with cystic fibrosis, etc. So the goal is to make sure that the population represents the individuals that have the disease. So again, we understand the safety and we understand the benefits of our medicines for all of these groups of individuals. This will be the last slide that I'm sharing with you that has numbers or any kind of data. And this looks at our genetic studies, the genetic studies that have been conducted between 2007 and 2017. These genetic studies are conducted to basically understand what are the genetic abnormalities that cause disease. And as you can see, they looked at this during the period, this 10-year period of time. In 2017, the last time that this was looked at in this publication, 88% of those individuals in those studies were of European descent. 6% were Asian individuals, less than 1% were African American, and then about 2% were African American or Caribbean. So these are the types of studies that help agencies, organizations decide how are they going to or where are they going to develop medicines. If we're not represented in those studies and they don't understand the variants and the differences that are relevant to our populations. So now let's talk a little bit specifically about the barriers. What's blocking individuals from participating in clinical trials? This is broken down based on multiple sources. So you see here on the left, the sponsors, that's us. These are the barriers that we have in front of us. We are the sponsors. And next are the sites. And those are the clinical trial offices, the hospitals that we collaborate that conduct the clinical trials. And then you see the patient as well as the societal sources of these barriers. From the sponsor perspective, we have a low willingness to work with sites that don't do multiple clinical trials. That's something that we need to work on, because if we continue to go to the same sites, we're going to continue to get the same data. As well, sometimes we have a limited understanding of actually what patients need in order to participate. From a site perspective, many times you see that there's a lack of diversity of the investigators and the research staff in general. We know that many times we try to go to areas where we're comfortable in. So there's a lack of diversity of our researchers. As well, there's a lack of infrastructure to support unique needs. So for example, if in order to conduct a clinical study, we need coordinators, we need nurses. And so there's less of that. And then referring to clinical trials, many times some of our doctors are a little afraid to refer their patients to clinical studies. And then there's also a lack of community engagement as well. In order for the sites in order to have a good relationship with the community and their diverse patients, they need to make sure that they're engaged within the community. They understand the cultural differences and they're able to meet the patients where they are. From a patient perspective, some of the barriers that block them from participating in clinical trials are the lack of trust in pharma and medical research in general, as well as practical obstacles such as the distance to the clinical trial sites. Just as importantly, if not more importantly, is a lack of awareness of the clinical trials. And then health literacy. Sometimes we make our information a little too complicated, and that becomes a bit of a challenge for our patients. From a societal perspective, very plain and simple, sometimes there's unconscious bias where the investigator just makes assumptions. Oh, this individual won't want to participate in a clinical trial because they're not adhering even with their main medications. And some of this is steeped in racism as well. Let's talk really quickly now just about our strategic approaches towards solutions. I don't want to hold you back from this party, but really quickly, what we're doing here at GSK is we're making sure we understand the patients with the disease. So we define who should be in that trial. We put a great amount of work in understanding the epidemiology. Who are the individuals, again, with the disease? We make sure that we understand those intrinsic and extrinsic factors that I talked to you about before. And then we try to challenge that eligibility criteria, that we're not just bringing them over from one study to the next, to the next. Is there an opportunity for us to expand that age group? Is there an opportunity to expand the blood pressure limitations that we're willing to allow? So this way we don't cut off certain populations. And then we also make sure that we're using real world data to know where can we find those patients. So we remind ourselves of the barriers and we make sure that we're creating solutions that truly address those barriers. So from the patient perspective, we make sure that we try to seek patient input on the medicine development. What matters to them? Are our protocols or studies too burdensome to them? So we try to get that input. And then we make sure that we collaborate with participants as well as patient advocacy as we're developing the study design, making sure that informed consent is not too complicated. And then what are the endpoints? What are the assessments? Our understanding of how the medicines work important to patients. So make sure that we try to incorporate those as well. And then we commit to sharing study results in language that's plain and simple and straightforward. Many of these areas we're very successful in and we're doing on a regular basis. Some of these are aspirational. Really quickly, winding down from a site perspective, we're trying to challenge our sites to engage and educate their patients. We also want to make sure that they're trying to increase accessibility. So we challenge them and support them more to have flexible hours. So this way we're not pulling them away from work, and making sure that they're able to have transportation and remote monitoring. This way, can we bring the trial to the patient? Again, to try and minimize the burden. And we also try to make sure that we're training and supporting those research naive sites, and make sure that the staff in these sites understand the differences culturally so they can incorporate that. Finally, from a societal and sponsor perspective, again, we're making sure that the community is engaged and educated, and that we try to build research capabilities. This is something that we're starting this year, but can we go into communities, collaborate with either medical institutions or small clinics to help them conduct clinical research? So it's so important to develop those partnerships within the community. Winding down, we started out with the question of the value. What is the value? Here's a last story. This is a slide that represents a story behind a medicine called the PCSK9 inhibitors. It's a class of medicines that are extremely effective in reducing high cholesterol. The researchers understood a good part of the disease for a very long time. As they were trying to understand more information, they looked at this Dallas Heart Study, and that was a database that was built with the intention to have diverse individuals. And they were trying to look for individuals that actually have a mutation in this region so that they can better understand the disease and develop a medicine. Lo and behold, they found two individuals that had this mutation. Both of these individuals were Black individuals. One had a single copy that was mutated. Their LDL, the low density lipoprotein, was 100, fantastic number. The other individual had two copies that were mutated, and that LDL was super low. So two pharmaceutical companies understood that, got on top of that, developed monoclonal antibodies that are now extremely effective on the market in the UK as well, at lowering levels of cholesterol, as well as lowering the risk of heart disease. So winding down, what is the value? When we look at our medicines and vaccines, the value of having diverse representation in clinical trials is about making sure we understand that benefit risk profile characterized for all patients, not just one small group of patients. We also make sure that the exposure levels, what's the level of medicine in our system, we understand those and we can make the adjustments. And as you saw with the PCSK9 inhibitor story, having this diversity can also drive discovery of novel targets. Looking from a regulatory perspective, having this information goes into the label. So this way our healthcare practitioners can make the adjustments and again, know what the right medicine is for the right patients. And again, we make sure that we understand those intrinsic and extrinsic factors. And just as important is access to medicines. If we don't have this information, it will delay this process. So the goal here is to make sure that we have timely access to our medicines. Finally, it's imperative that we embrace diverse representation in our research and development. And that's in order to address the variability in responses to our medicines and vaccines as we more and more treat individuals and not entire populations, as well by ensuring that we know the individuals most likely to benefit from our medicines, and by working within communities to break down those barriers. GSK will be a trustworthy partner in driving global health equity. And finally, clinical trial diversity is an integral part of our science times technology times culture-driven approach to research and development. Here are a number of sites that you can look at for additional information. The European Patients Academy on Therapeutic Innovation, that's UPATI, and then both the US FDA as well as our Health and Human Services site have phenomenal information, as well as the Society for Clinical Research sites. With that, I thank you and ask if you have any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Harry. That was great.
Thank you very much, Roz. I appreciate that.
So we do have a couple of questions that came in. One is, what is on the horizon in terms of one of the biggest advances in therapeutics that gets you excited right now? What is in the pipeline that gets you excited personally?
That's a fantastic question. I would say there are a couple of things. One is around cell therapy, because that's very specific treatment that has the ability to try and correct the disease. We're doing more and more and more of that. So that's one area. Another area that's maybe even more exciting to me is the use of technology. Sometimes we bring technology in just because we think we need to. However, there are a number of examples where that technology is bringing the power back to the patient to really take charge of their disease. And that's what thrills me about it, because it takes away some of these barriers and it gives the information back to the patient. So the involvement of technology in healthcare really excites me. Thank you for that question. It's a great one.
Absolutely. Then we said, at the end of the day, with people of color, are you seeing the same types of questions in the UK globally as you see in the United States? You know, the United States has that Tuskegee kind of thought process hanging over their heads. Is there, what are you seeing globally as a reason why clinical trial participation could be lower?
You know, again, excellent question, really challenging. You know, the caveat is I haven't taken a full look across the countries, but looking just at the UK and sharing some of those numbers and comparing that to what's going on in the US, unfortunately, I do see a lot of trends where, you know, healthcare practitioners may have a little bit more motivation to focus on certain populations, and maybe have a little bit of less motivation to sometimes do a little bit more work in communicating with patients of color. I see that in the UK, I see that in the US. Those numbers around maternal mortality, you know, are not region specific, right? So unfortunately, I do see a lot of those same things that we see in the US. I see them in the UK. And that's why I feel like the goal is to make sure that I'm informing you all so that, again, you have the information and you can take charge. You can challenge the physicians. Bias is bias wherever we are. And so by you being informed and empowered, you can make sure that you're challenging the physicians to give you the care that you need.
Awesome, thank you. Well, Dr. Harry, it looks like we are out of time. So again, thank you so much for your support of the Black Health Matters Summit that is now global. And again, thank you for your most informative presentation.
Thank you very much, Roz. Thank you all. Appreciate the opportunity. Hopefully this was helpful to you all. Thank you.
All right. So now we're going to close the day. And I just want to thank some of the team members and the people who made it possible. You know, this takes a village, and now we have a global village. So my first team I have to thank are Vish, Aruj, Amima. I know I'm missing someone, Moomin, So we want to thank you all. It's always a pleasure. They are our We Bears family, and they hail from Abu Dhabi, Dubai. They hail from Dubai. So thank you. The next I have to thank are the BHM Global team, and we would call them the This Is My City team or BCU team. So I think I have to start with Dr. Baziru Guy, who contacted me. You know, who knows? People don't think that their emails get answered, but Dr. Guy sent me a note, said, hey, let's partner on a Black Health Matters Summit. I'm in England, you're in the United States, let's do it. And of course I was like, let's do it. So that's why we're all here today. So thank you for that vision. We want to thank, and I'm not going to use everyone's last name because I'm going to mispronounce it, but we had quite the team. We had Panicos, of course, Dawn Carr, who you talked to with today, Angela Kumar, who again you spoke with, she presented today, Angela Hewitt, who is our expat. Thank you so much for, being a great support for this program. Xenia, with her expert PR skills, Karen and Atia, thank you from the bottom of our heart. Now, I think a couple years ago when we were doing these programs, people were saying, oh, Rosalind, you do a great program. It's like, what are you talking about? I got so many people behind the scenes. Come on. Actually, you get a chance to see. Come on, ladies. There are so many of us behind the scenes, and these are just a few of the folks. Aren't they all lovely? We are an equal opportunity provider. We do hire men. It just so happens that we do tend to be heavy female. So in terms of our team, we want to thank Tanya Hill, who made this. I asked Tanya if she would be kind of the project manager on it, and she agreed, and she saw it through, and she did a great job. Lynette Roach, who had a true passion for this work, excuse me, her love of international sports, track and field, really helped her, excuse me, were of benefit to us as she put this together. Excuse me. Leslie Fontenot, my partner, thank you. You're gonna have to read this, Deidre. I'm dry.
Uh-oh. Hello, everyone.
Our producer.
So we would like to thank again Tanya Hill, Lynette Roach, Colin Rock, Leslie Fontenot, Holly Ashton, Michaela Weeks, Octavia Sadler, Maria Moffitt, Terry Ann Freeman, Robbie Tate Brickle, Janine Tate, and I am Deidre Tate, who was the director of event production for this event. And so thank you so much for joining us for our first Global Summit. It was amazing. We are so grateful to have worked with everyone from across the pond. We cannot wait to make it over to Birmingham to visit you and your lovely city. So have a great day. And now you can click on our next closing video and then head over to the after party. So take care. Bye-bye.